This is John Keyworth's Megagame Design Map for Dummies panel at MegaCon, and I'm going to hand over to John in a second to discuss the very subject. John is a keen megagame designer, quite prolific actually. I remember playing John's game called Relics of the Fall in Reading in the UK, which had a beautiful map and lots of great components actually, which I had a great time at. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand over to you, John, and I'll ask you any questions if you want during the session, or obviously at the end when you finish designing things.
Okay, hello everyone, welcome to my talk, Map Design for Dummies. It's Chris's name, so he's the one calling you all dummies, it's not me. What we're going to cover, hopefully, over the next hour, will be a kind of a mix of everything. We've got some of the technical stuff to sort of software and things. We've got some design considerations and some sort of aesthetics and usability and that sort of thing. So it's going to be very, very high level at times, and then sort of zoom in on little bits and pieces that I think are important. While I will be showing you the software that's being used, you may or may not be using the same type of software, and you won't understand how to use it after listening to this talk. You'll need to look at tutorials and that sort of thing on how to use a specific software that you want to use, but it will hopefully give you an idea of the kind of things that you need to consider and the kind of concepts that some map making software uses. So yes, software or some places. So yeah, the software places where you can get resources to including your maps. Yeah, basic design considerations, some accessibility things, and then also getting your map printed, which I can only speak to from getting it printed from the UK perspective, but I expect it's similar elsewhere. Right, so without further ado, the first thing we will cover is software. So something that's so obviously you want to use some kind of image manipulation software to make your map, as you might imagine. But what you are probably used to, if you've used something like Paint, on your sort of level of expertise and experience, is to what's called a raster images. Okay, so what these do is they store a grid of sort of colours and end up looking like you can see on the screen, hopefully at the moment, like this map of the world. What you will find, however, is when you zoom in, it gets all pixelated and grainy, which is not ideal because your megagame map is not going to be the size of your computer screen. Your megagame map is going to be probably 6 foot across. So yes, what you don't want to do is spend ages making a lovely map, get it off to the printer, it comes back and it looks like this horrible blurry mess. So there is what you could do is use this and use an incredibly high resolution image, but that would take quite a powerful computer and it's usually a bit slow to manipulate. And there are other advantages of using this other approach I'm about to say. The other approach to storing things is what is called vector graphics. So if we get this map up here, you will be able to see what I mean. So this is a map for a map I've done for someone for a game that's not been run yet. But as you zoom into this map, re-render, re-render, and what it doesn't do is get pixelated at all. And it's called a vector image. So instead of being stored as a grid of pixels, it is stored as a list of sort of points and the lines between them and the colors that those lines should be. And that's a sort of basic explanation of it. It'll become more apparent as we go through the demonstration what that means. Yes, I wonder when this game is going to run as well, Ed. Yes. So, right. So what you really want to do is use a vector format to make your image. It also means everything in this image, every one of these little trees, every one of these sort of letters and the background and things, it's stored as an individual element. So you can go back and you can change what you like, basically. Hard to do this. I've got this image quite locked down, but you know, you could drag this text around. You can recolor things. It's a lot easier than if you had just a grid of pixels and you'd sort of colored over it, and then you need to color over it in something different. Yes, it's just generally a lot easier and a lot nicer. So there's 3 main bits of software that you might want to use that edit vector format. The first is Inkscape, which has the advantage of being completely free. It's relatively powerful. It's got quite a few nice tools and extensions and things for it. It's a little bit tricky to learn. Like, it's got a lot of panels and a lot of options, and I wouldn't say it's the easiest thing to get to grips with. But like I say, it is free. The other problem it has, it does slow down a bit if you have too many objects in your map, which, even though your map's big, it might not have lots of objects in it. So this is a relatively simple looking map compared to this one, which has got all these little individual trees and the like, and zooms out and has all sorts of mountains and all sorts. So that is a bit of a flaw. It's free. Probably a good thing to start using. The next one that is what I moved on to after that. It's called Affinity Designer. There's a one-off cost for buying it. It's not prohibitively expensive, but it's not super cheap. That's not how you spell Bretonia. Thank you. Yes. So I'm sure that will be fixed. I'm sure someone will notice that before this gets printed out and shown to dozens of people. Right. So yes. Lacks some of the features that Inkscape has, but it is quite easy to use and it is lightning quick. Basically, you can see this map has got hundreds of elements on it, but you can move around. It's not slowed down at all. Basically, which is very nice when you're working with a map. Is like speed and ease of use. But yes, so that's another one that's a sort of a mid tier, I guess. And then the other one, which is a little more pricey, is Adobe Illustrator, which is what sort of professional people end up using. It's got a relatively expensive monthly fee. So certainly not something to consider unless you need it. But it does kind of have everything. It is, yeah, let's say the sort of the professional option. Yes. So those are the 3 types of, or 3 pieces of software that edit vector images that you might want to use. More technical details. We'll go through some of the sort of the things you ought to be aware of when doing this. And the first is that things are stored in layers. So you can see down here, you've got this panel, and each of these is a layer, and the layers build up on top of one another with various things. So you can have a layer for your base map, you have a layer on top of it for labels, a layer on top of that for your game components, and so on. You sort of build up, basically, which is something that very basic painting programs don't use. But yeah, most of the more advanced ones do. It's very important to use layers so that you can organize everything. They're not the only free software packages, but the free ones that they're the main ones, and they're the ones that I'm familiar with. Other software is available, but I couldn't tell you about it, Ed. Right, sorry. Anyway, going back. So yes, those layers are very important for organizing your map. You're going to end up with you know, a dozen of them if you're doing it right, at least. Just so you can keep yourself organized and you know what's what, and you can have layers for like the reference material on the side of your map to keep that out of the way. You can lock layers so that you can't interact with it and move it and mess it up. It's just a very good tool. The other thing is colors. You're most likely to have come across RGB colors before, which is red, green, blue. So this just stores a color as how much red there is in it, how much green there is in it, and how much blue there is in it, which is fine, it's simple. It is not the best way to work with colors. So there's a couple of other color spaces. CMYK is what printers use because it's cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. K is for black, obviously. And that is basically that's telling the printer what to do almost directly. It's the difference between that and RGB is that some colors can't be represented in each. So there is a slight problem. Sometimes if you convert over from RGB, which most software uses, your images can end up looking a little bit muddy. Yes, I think only of the software that I've shown, only Illustrator actually uses CMYK. Yes, so that is quite nice. There is a nice one called HSB, hue, saturation, and brightness, which is quite intuitive. So that's the hue is what color it is. The saturation is how much that color it is, and then the brightness is how dark it is, basically. And that's quite a nice way of thinking about colors. If you want to have a color and you say, oh, well, I want a nice bright, you know, I want a sort of a darker version of it, then you just move the slider. Whereas if you're in RGB, you can see, you know, the differences between those sliders are a lot different because it's a lot harder to work with when you're just trying to pick nice colors. So that's something you might not have considered. The other main thing for vector graphics is what's called a path. So if I can draw a path on here, like that. So you can see these dots, they are the sort of path nodes. Then if we edit a node, you can see you've got these anchors that show the sort of how it curves, or you can make them into sort of flat points. You can do a lot of things, basically editing them once you've drawn them. I'm drawing them with I've got a stylus and a tablet, but to be honest, most of the maps that I've made, I've just done with a pen, so that's fine. You ever run problems with stuff on the screen not looking the same as when you printed it? I've not run, I mean, I haven't. So yes, I'm back onto colors. Ed's asking, the colors on your screen are not necessarily the colors that print out. So when I've done printing at home, certainly there has been discrepancies on my home printer between what's been on the screen and what I've printed out. I've never sent something to a printer and had the file that I got back look sort of disappointingly different, if that makes sense. I have had some cards end up looking a bit muddy, but that's because of the way I exported them and the CMYK sort of conversion process didn't happen very well, but the files that I sent to the printer looked a bit muddy and then they came back a bit muddy. So I'm afraid I don't have any tips necessarily for balancing that. One thing I will say for your home printer actually is if you've got big blocks of black, don't basically make it into a sort of mid-tone or sort of slightly dark grey perhaps, because not only does it use a lot of ink, it can mess up the way it prints. So yeah, home printers probably aren't that useful, which is very important, obviously, especially if you're play testing things, is you want something that you can print up at home. So that's something to consider there. Right, So so we've got a path, we can edit the points and the things. It has got two components. It's got what's called the stroke. The stroke is the bit around the outside. So if you make that thicker, you better see that is the stroke. And we can change the stroke color, and there are all sorts of options on it. I'm not going to go into detail because you might not be using this software and they'll be slightly different. Essentially. And then the other thing is the fill, which is everything that's inside it. And you can set that to a different color. And that is, yes, the main sort of thing that you'll probably be doing will be modifying stuff like that, basically in order to make lots of nice shapes that you'll end up making into your maps. Right, so they're the sort of three sort of basic things that you probably wouldn't have come across before if you haven't used software like this before. So now we're going to get slightly more into the map making side of things rather than the software side of things. So how do you decide you need a map, decide what the map is supposed to be, find some references for it, scope out what it's going to be, that sort of thing. So yes, you've got your main, you want a map for it. There are various design considerations that will go into that. Your design will obviously affect making the map, but how you can make the map and the restrictions on that may also affect your design, because there's some things that while the design might look nice, when it gets to the table, it won't be as it won't work as well, basically. So, for instance, the size of your map, how many players are going to be at this map? If you've got a map and you've got a game and you're imagining 20 people are going to turn up to this map all at the same time, that's going to be one big map. So the rule of thumb I use is you need about 2 foot of map space per player, including control, at a map. So if you've got a 6 foot by 4 foot map, you've got about space for about 10 people at the map. You've got about 6 foot by 6 foot, that only goes up to 12 people, because you've only got 2 little extra side bits to add on. So that's something to consider for your game design. Is while it is a mega game, you can't send too many people to a map at once, because yes, people have to use these maps, basically. They have to be at them. Yes, so you want to think your map size. So I would recommend your printer will probably have, or they may well have, templates or some kind of specification for how you should get the maps to them and what size they should be. So here in the UK, I think most people use Pixar, and if you put in a map, they use PVC banners, you set the size of your map, and you go down and you can just download a template, and you can copy that template directly into your software. And so this is a template, and it's got the sort of cut lines and the bleed mile lines and that sort of thing, and it'll tell you what these lines mean. But basically, don't put anything near the edge of the map. It might not get printed, or it might be folded under the map, essentially. So if you do that first, you can work on top of the template, and then everything is the right size. So if you draw something in here, and this software says it's 1 inch across, it's going to be 1 inch across when it's printed out. Otherwise, you might end up having to rescale things and rejig things, and that's really kind of awkward. Yes. So what game design wise, if you found out your map has to be too big, you've got a map, you've decided it can't be too big. You want 20 players to use it, but then they won't be able to reach all the components. What can you do? So there's various ways it's been solved. So in Relics, for instance, I had one map with pretty much everything on it for the second run of Relics, but there were 2 different phases. There was an economic phase and a military phase. So different players would join the map at different times and get to see what the other people had done, but then also get to modify it and interfere with it. And then the next group of players come in and deal with that. There can be a problem with information density. If you've got too much stuff going on your map, it can just look like a mess. So that's not always an option. The other thing you can do is splitting your maps up. So you have multiple maps. So for instance, Arrival has a military map and an economic map and a espionage map. This can be good because each map's got its own game and it only has to show the stuff for that map. But it does have a lot of work for control, keeping all the maps up to date and running around and communicating. Third option you've got probably is splitting the map into different areas. So for instance, in going games middle up. In the Raven Banner, we've got these 3 maps for different areas of England, and each map has a set of people around it. And then the wrinkle there is, how do you, like if you wanted to send an army from here into the adjacent zone over here, well, how does that work? That's a game design constraint, and getting people running around, especially if you've got sort of phases that you've got to keep, you might have to keep linked between the maps, that becomes unworkable. There's a lot of things you have to consider in your game design if your maps have got so big that you need to split them up by geography, for instance. So yes, they're all, you can all work these things out, but they're all things you have to consider. Right, so you've got your map. So I'm going to, as an example, use the idea of a sort of modern map. So this is for a game that hasn't been announced yet, although it probably won't end up looking like this. But so imagine we've got the modern world where we've got a very big game. So we're deciding to split the map up into continents. So how are you going to basically draw a map around an area of the world? So we could say, okay, well, we'll have Europe as a map. Do we have enough players on that map? Do we need to include more of that? Is there going to be enough action at that map? Often in a sort of fairly realistic modern game, if you're in Europe, there's less going on than if you are elsewhere in the world. It's a little bit more stable, and the military players might get a military map might get a little bit left out, shall we say. So what you could do is readjust your map. So you see this thing here. You could have a map and you could include the Middle East in it and Europe if you put it at an angle, which probably makes the map a little bit more exciting. It also means, so you can see that if we've got another map of South Africa, we've got some dead space here. We've probably got some dead space up here where not much is going on. That's probably a good thing. Your players are going to turn up to your map. They're going to bring counters. They're going to bring sheets of paper. They're going to have cards. They're going to need space to roll dice. So having big areas around the edge of the map where not much is going on is another thing that's ideal. Yes. So yes, we've got this. Where are people going to want to stand at the map? Where are the points of conflict? So you don't want everyone crowding around one tiny little corner if your game is, got a big thing where Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are going to go to war, and most people are going to want to sit around that corner of the map. Perhaps don't arrange it like this. But this could be quite, obviously I've picked this in advance. So we've got the European players around here, the Middle Eastern players around here, and we've got some conflict that's, slightly lopsided, but at least if you're standing, around here, you can probably reach it. It's not the end of the world. It's not taking place in like a tiny corner somewhere. So that's something to consider. Yes. So where do you get these maps from? So I've brought in a bunch of references, maps. There's lots of websites I'll be sharing links to, but Wikimedia Commons is good. If you look for SVG, scalar vector graphic maps, then you'll get them in a scalar vector graphic in a vector format, which means that when they're pulled in, they won't look like this one does. It's all pixelated. They will instead look like this one does, and being a nice format for you to use. You can't always account for that, but that is something to consider. If you do get one of these maps, there is a useful tool that you can have. So it's, for instance, if we have a map here, we've got it. One thing, so what you can do is you can use an image trace tool. So what this will do, it will take a raster image like this, and it will try and convert it into paths and colors, basically. So you will pick, want it to be in color, maybe we've got a lot of colors. It's a big map, so we've got lots of options. It'll look different. So Inkscape's one looks different to this. It's not quite as nice as this one, but you know, I'm not going to explain exactly how to use it because find a tutorial. This isn't that kind of thing. But then you'll trace the image, and once that's done, it'll take 30 seconds to trace, and then you get something that might look like that. So I've recolored the sea in this, but if you see, it looks kind of like that of a map, but when you zoom in, everything has been vectorized, which is nice. Yes. Speaking of tutorials for things like this and everything else, there is a website called the Cartographers Guild, which has a forum on it that's got more tutorials than you could hope to read, basically, on all the different types of software, making maps, all this kind of stuff. All of the technical details that I'm just kind of breezing over in this talk are available there. I'll make all these links available. I'll get them to you somehow. Yes. Okay. So we scoped our map. We've made a map. We've imported our base map. It all looks very, you know, very nice. So, what to do now? So the next thing we've got is we're just breaking up the map into regions usually for the game. So if we just imagine this is for Watch the Skies, we're just going to concentrate down on this bit for the sake of the thing. So what we can do is, what I've got here is I've copied in. This is a copy of this with all the national borders on, because you can see the national borders are missing. What you'll notice is that it's not quite the same. It's got a slightly different projection, and that does make things difficult, obviously. But what essentially you have to do if you're suffering from having multiple maps with different projections is you can kind of work locally. You can draw France, you can draw a thing, and then when you get onto Italy, you'll have to move it a little bit up here, maybe rotate it a bit, and then you can get the good border over here to trace, and so on and so forth. It's a little bit tedious, but it means you can combine the different maps that you've got, even if they're in a slightly different projection, slightly different formats, in order to get them aligned with each other. The other thing I've pulled in is this coastline. So what I've done is from the trace bitmap, I pulled out the coastline and I've copied it onto here as a new layer and just recolored it so that it's black and white, basically, or just black. Sorry, just a black outline. Anything that you can get that's already done, especially if it's already on your map, is useful, because we're going to do some borders. So we've obviously got the borders around there, we've got the borders around here. What you'll want to do is you want to get your pencil tool and you want to trace around them. Now, here's one I did earlier. Okay, now you'll notice I've done these a little segment of border at the time. This will be important later, because if you're doing the border for France, it wants to be exactly the same as the border you've got here for the Low Countries, but you're going to want it twice. You're going to want it once in this shape here, and you're going to want it once in that shape here. So if you've got it separate, it's very easy to just duplicate it and then include it in both parts of your map, rather than not. The other thing I've done here is I've got this the coastline, and then I've chopped out part of coastline that corresponds to the French coast. You can just basically, you end up selecting a single node, and then for this software, you've got like a cut tool. Other software have similar tools. And you just chop it into chunks so that you end up with a bunch of different chunks for each of the borders around your country, which is nice. So you can get those borders. You can that's the wrong keys. That. So you can get your borders. You can duplicate them up this layer. Thank you. Sorry about this. Technical problems. I don't know what I'm doing, honest.
No, not at all. I wouldn't know what I'm looking at, so yeah, I'm very impressed.
Yeah, okay, so you can get them, you just copy and paste them, and then there are various ways of getting a path and making it into one path. Because you had all those component parts, and now they're all one. And then just a very simple way is you might want to say, okay, let's make it blue. Keep them happy. You also might want to make it put opacity on it so that you can see the stuff underneath it. Looks a bit ugly, to be honest. But as a if you're doing something like a play test, essentially, then maybe having everything in block primary colors, maybe faded out a bit for the sake of your printer and your ink cartridge, would be good. But for a final map, we can do one better, I think. So yes, if we take that away. So what I've got here, this is a technique I quite like using. I will show you now. It's just one way of making paths. So we've got the paths, and we've joined them together. There, and then so you make 3 copies of them. So this is going to show you a few little things you can do. So we've got the path, we've got a bunch of paths. So if you select the stroke, we make it blue. Nothing has happened, obviously, but it's on the bottom, so we can't see it. It's underneath all the others. So if we make it large, we can see we've got this big blue border. So if you imagine it was like that, you can see the terrain in the middle. That looks nice, and you've got this blue border around France. What you're running then is a problem with is it bleeds over the edges. So if we select another copy of our border, this is an incredibly useful thing that's available in software called clipping. So you can clip one thing into each other. So only things that are inside the first object will show up, basically. So you can clip out everything around the outside. It's non-destructive, it's still there. You can still edit it. But it's hidden basically from the final result. Want to make it slightly bigger, you can also apply effects to things. For instance, the blur on it, blurs look quite nice. Now we've got this nice sort of effect on our French border, which looks quite nice. Keep it solid and blur it. There is one slight issue with using effects like blur, and that is when you're exporting them, sometimes the format that your printer wants, if it's like a PDF file, for instance, might not support all of the effects that you're trying to use inside your software, at which point it will rasterize the image, it will turn it into pixels again. And it might not look quite the same. You might have to be careful about what resolution you export it in so it doesn't get pixelated and you defeat the object of making one of these vectorized graphics. So it's just something to be concerned, to be aware of, is that if you do stuff like this, make sure you export your map every time you try something new. Make sure it works properly, make sure it looks good in the exported version that you're going to send to the printer. Otherwise, you can spend a lot of effort wasting time making a map that is going to look pretty poor. basically. So yeah, that's something to consider. So yeah, so if we do that, yeah, for other countries, etc., you know, rinse and repeat basically. Other countries, other areas, whatever it is that you're doing, it's one way of doing it. Notes. Okay, so one thing we're doing here is we've chosen countries, colours for our countries. So we'll talk a little bit about picking colours. So obviously we're all aware, I'm hoping, that colourblind people exist. There are tools you can use, for instance, that allow you to pick nice colour palettes. You can pick colourblind friendly palettes and that sort of thing. Some like this one that got up to 15 colours in them. This is nice. There are various tools you can sort of run your maps through filters to see if they'll work. At the end of the day, if it works as a black and white map, it'll work for people who are colourblind. Or if the detail, for instance, if this colour around the edge of the country is nice, but it's not required to play the game, then again, it's less of an issue. The other thing you can do is use lots of icons. Put icons in your map. So there's places like Font Awesome have loads of very clean looking icons. The Noun project has an unreasonable number of icons. You can just type in anything you like and they will just have masses and masses of free to use icons for your projects. And these are all in SVG format as well, so you can put them in, you can zoom in them, modify them really easily. So that is, yes, something that is nice something to consider, basically, when you're doing the colours on things like this. Yes, colour palettes. Yeah, so the other thing you can do, I mean, there's lots of, I'm not going to go through everything you can do, but obviously you see you can do dashed and dotted lines. Something you see in maps quite often is a line that looks like that, which is just a solid line and then duplicated with a dashed line over the top of it. Like lots of little, you end up picking up lots of little things like that that make these things look quite nice.
Would you say that having, say, dotted lines in a map like this for the borders is a good idea? You were talking about obviously colourblind a moment ago. Would that work?
Yes. So, yeah. Sorry, this was me moving on from colourblindness, and accessibility. So, what you want is your different levels of border to be represented in different ways. So, for instance, in this case, our country borders are quite thick. They're solid. They've got these blue things in it. Within the country, we've got these dotted lines. It lets people, like, if there's a gameplay difference, then you'll be able to see sort of at a glance, basically, that is different. So you can see it quite clearly on this map. So this is not countries. These are regions. Well, I mean, these are countries. So these blue ones are the player countries. So you can see very clearly this is where the players are. Whereas here are the sort of non-played regions, but within them, so they're important because in this case you've got like you ally with regions and that sort of thing. You have control of regions, whereas your military units will be in these like sub-regions. So if everything just had a solid border around it, you know, what's a region, what's a sub-region, who knows? This map was originally also going to have trade regions on it as well, and they were going to be separate, which again comes back to the point earlier of how much information can you cram onto one map exactly, because if you've got these regions, these sub-regions, then this whole thing has a big trade region around it, and the edge of the map is covered in sea regions as well. Like how much you can't look at the map and parse it and say, oh, that's what it is, but you can, with like things like dotted lines, get more detail into the map without losing readability. So different styles of things. But obviously you want the styles to be consistent across your map. You want all subregions to be dotted, and all, or whatever it is that you've chosen for them. You want all country borders to be another thing. If the Pope Coast is important, you know, again, keeping things consistent is important, which is also a good thing. Things like Font Awesome and Noun Project is getting these icons, using them throughout your game, so that everything is nice and consistent, and you can just tell things at a glance. Yeah. So next things, we want some game features on the map. So if we say we're putting units onto here, and we've got like a supply limit of how many units can be in an area, it's quite nice. You can bake your game rules onto the map. So if you're only allowed 3 units here, rather than having a little number 3, maybe have 3 tiles that are the same size as units, and then the players just look at it and they know. You know, it's baked into the map. It's absolutely fine. You can see if everything's the right size, you can see that this says it's 1 inch by 1 inch. It'll print out 1 inch by 1 inch, assuming, you know, your map is exported 1-to-1 and, you know, you're using your printer's templates. So that's that. It does make it a little harder to reuse sometimes, but, you know, it can be just incredibly easy for the player to have rules embedded in the map so that they know. Got another example. Yeah, that's what we can. Here, for instance, so this is Ed's Grace of God map. We've got some tables built into the map. So if you go privateering on the American coast, you can see the table there, you can see the table there, that sort of thing. You can see who controls different sea zones. Counters that have been placed here. You know, so they're specific, very specific to the game, but they can help players not have to go away to a rule book or leaf through sheets of paper. But you've got to have the space to do it. Yes. So there is that. Another thing I'll go on to. So this is just a sort of whistle stop tour, I guess, of lessons I've learned making maps. So another one is masking the edge of the map. So this map, I said earlier, Africa is on a different map. So if we mask this out in white, no one is going to accidentally see that and go, you know what I should do? I should put one of my units here. You know, it's very clear, it's very obvious that this isn't part of the map that you're playing with. If you want to do something here, go to another map. And it also creates this space where you can roll dice and you can put things down, which is quite nice. Another thing, we're nearly done on random stuff. So labels, so you want to put labels into the map. So this comes on to putting labels. Most maps have labels put on arcs, which you can do in all the software. I won't tell for you how to do it because we're running on time. But draw a text on an arc, and then you can modify it by just dragging it around and, you know, getting it into the place. One thing that you'll find on maps is that the size of the font doesn't generally vary, but they stretch to fill the available space, and that's a setting called tracking, which you can adjust so that it changes the amount of space between all the letters on the text, and that's what they use when they're making maps to stretch text in and out. That's just another little thing. Font selection. Again, we're putting labels on here. They want to be the same fonts that you used elsewhere in your game. General rule of thumb for choosing fonts is you probably only want like a nice fancy font for your table, your title. But beyond that, you probably want one header font and one body text font, and they both need to be quite readable. So you don't want to see a font like this here as, you know, you don't want France written in a font like that on your game map. People will spend a while, especially if like some people are reading this upside down from across the map. They'll have no clue. You can get some nice thematic fonts. I'm quite fond of this one. It's called Special Elite, which is a sort of written type font. It's got quite a nice sort of military feel to it for a lot of things. But there's a lot of fonts out there you can choose. There's lots of sites with free fonts. The font is a good one. 101 free fonts also has a huge amount of options. Yeah, basically, again, can make links to all this stuff available. But yes, choose nice fonts, but be restrained in the ones that you are picking. There's probably a whole nother talk on choosing fonts, to be honest, that I probably don't know quite enough about to give that talk on. Yes, more, and so yeah, a couple more bits before we get to the end of the talk. So one thing you might find is that your layer at the bottom is muddying the colors that you put above it. One thing that you can do that's quite nice is if you just get a layer and you put a rectangle under the entire map, basically. In this case, I've got a rectangle. I've set it to, I mean, it will start off looking like this. So you just game components on the top. You've got all the nice, pretty map stuff underneath. What we want to do is sort of hide the stuff under here. So these options, you'll have them on layers or images. All the software will have it. These are different ways in which colors mix together, basically. So for this one, I want to have saturation. So anything below it, the saturation value, which in HSB is how black and white it is taken from that big white rectangle. And then everything else is whatever it was. So you can see we've got this sort of monochrome underlying map. Obviously, that's a bit going too far the other way and blank it out a bit too much. So we could bring the saturation up, and that'll bring some of the colors back. Other things you can do is you can take the opacity down. So there are various different ways which you can, once you've got the map, and if you think, oh, I don't like those colors, you can just adjust them in a very non-destructive way, in just a way where you've got your own layer that just adjusts everything underneath it and makes it, you know, easier to read, basically, and you can play around with it as much as you like. Or maybe you want a slightly steppier tone. You can, you know, you can say you can take the hue and we can make it everything very yellow or slightly yellow. Taking the opacity down might be quite nice for an old-fashioned map. You've got a lot of options to play with, basically, and yes, sorry, reading questions. You can you know, play around from your heart's content, basically, in order to try and make the things that you want to pop, the things that you don't not. So that's made this map very, very bright, very vibrant, by making everything a lot yellower. But yeah, perhaps not ideal. Right. Yes, so that is all we're going to do on this map. So it's essentially that, but repeated over the entire blooming thing. It takes a long time, but you know, put it on a podcast and it'll be fine. So the final thing you're doing is once you've got your map, it will be exporting it. So you want to different software has different ways of exporting it. Illustrator uses these things called artboards. They're quite nice because you can have multiple of them. So you can have multiple things in the same file. Export all of them. Affinity has this slightly more convoluted system of making slices and export persona. This one's quite nice. You can see I've got one background map, but each of these sort of blue headings is a different slice. So it's a different, all of the maps are made as one, and then the game stuff is made on its own layer, and then I can toggle it on and off. So I can make one big map for everything and then just get a single region and export it at a time. Doesn't work if your maps need to be slanted because you can't export on slant. Doesn't work if they need to be different scales. It's a little bit of a vanity thing. If you got the maps for this game and printed them out, you could put them all on the map on the floor and have one big map made out of them, which would be kind of fun. But obviously that's not practical. It's just just something for my enjoyment. Inkscape, I've always found a little bit more tricky with the export options. You've got like an export to PNG option, which is quite nice if they want a PNG file. Otherwise, you are I can't even remember how to do it now. It's been a while, but you can export to PDF, but you have to set the page size underneath to be the right size, and it's a little bit fiddlier to get it just right. Yes, like I said earlier, you need to make sure that you're exporting early to make sure that your maps do look like they look in the software that you're using. Yes, so yeah, typically we use PVC banners from Pixar Printing in the UK. I think so. They're relatively cheap. You want to be doing your maps well in advance, but they're getting rushed. It defaults to rush and it looks quite expensive. But if you look like the cheap options, only 2/3 the cost. So there is that. So I don't know anything about like printing in America or anywhere like that. They are printing things. They'll be printing out in 300 or 600 dots per inch DPI. So if you are sending through sort of raster images, it's worth knowing that anything with fewer pixels than that is going to end up looking a bit blurry. So you can see on this one, these are actual paintings from the period. I had to get quite high resolution versions of them, and they're just tucked into the map. Otherwise, they'd have been, hard to read. We've got a question coming in. Where do you get the font from? How do you balance the theme with eligibility? Yes. Fonts. So yeah, there's two free fonts. dafont.com is a good site. It's got lots of them, and you can one thing you can do there is filter by type and that sort of thing, which is quite good for getting a theme. And 1001freefonts.com, which is a terrible sounding name, also has loads of good ones. I'm quite fond of, anyway, I won't look it up, but there is a font. There are other places with fonts that can be quite nice, essentially. Theme with eligibility, yes, is a tricky one. But if you want a blackface font, you could get that close to black, and those capital letters, and those letters, who's reading those from across the room? Well, that K looks like an R. However, if you look at this one, the Seagram font, it's basically the same. It's just not got those fiddly bits. So you don't have to sacrifice the two, but you have to spend a while looking for them. Basically, you don't want little fiddly bits. You want to make sure that letters look distinct from each other. Then don't look like other letters when written upside down and that sort of thing. Make sure everything's printed out nice and big. But yes, yeah, that's the only real advice I've got, I think, for picking fonts. Is if you look through enough of them, you will be able to find one that looks thematic but is, decent looking.
Rob mentioned in the chat as well, there's fontsquirrel.com is another one he's looked at previously.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll have to check that one on. Yes. So yeah, there's other ways. Yeah, that is everything I got through to printing before I got distracted by talking about fonts again. But yeah, that is everything. I want to try doing a cloth map at some point from here, but I have no idea how that'll work, so I can't recommend it. I'll be the guinea pig for that one, maybe. Yes, but that is the talk. So we've covered some software, some of the sort of vector image sort of concepts, scoping your map, design considerations, bit of accessibility. The bit of accessibility I missed is, yes, the size of your map is important. I don't like making them more than about 6 foot by 4 foot, because otherwise someone can't play your game because they're only 5 foot tall and they can't reach, or they're on the wrong side of the map and have to run around the other side of the map and things like that. But the mileage might vary. That's another little thing. Yeah, we are on time.
Yes, you're perfectly on time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was it was really interesting. I
Yeah.
learned a lot. I'm not sure I'll be very capable of actually implementing some of this stuff, but I'm sure other people will. That was very, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Very top level overview. You won't be able to implement anything from this. You'll have to go and find tutorials, but hopefully now you know what you're looking for, basically, and you'll better come back to the recording when you get stuck and listen to something again.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will make all these videos available on YouTube in the coming days. So that's no problem at all. You mentioned obviously the links and things. Perhaps if you post them into the pub Discord channel, we'll pick them up from there as well and put them onto the YouTube description when we do that.
I've got my component making guide, which is on Megagame Assembly as well, and that's got most of the links. I'll make sure that they're all. Maybe I'll make sure they're all in there because that's it's a continuing resource essentially.
Yeah, that's perfect. And for the future, you obviously you ran Under Pressure, your playtest at MegaCon. Are you thinking of running that in the future at some point?
Yeah, and the pressure will get run again at some point once we've worked out the next step. I think, yeah, we've got a lot of things to do, especially on the technology side. I'm going to check out Project Nexus as a potential way of running it online and possibly some alternatives together. So we'll see what comes of them. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of programming between now and the next version. But yeah, hopefully that'll be good. And yeah, Raven Banner will probably be the next thing I can do another test of.
All right, fantastic. And where can people find you online if they want to catch up with anything you're up to?
So I've got a website, kiwigamedesign.co.uk, which gets updated once in a blue moon. Run MegaGames through Reading MegaGames, which obviously we're not doing anything at the moment. But generally I post things to basically every Discord when I'm doing playtests and actually running actual games. So as long as you're on some of the Mega Gaming Discords, you ought to be able to see me. If you want to get hold of me, then yes, again, I'm on Discord. Send me an email from my website or that sort of thing. I'll be in the pub after this, so if anyone's got any further questions, anything like that, they can ask, and I will do my best to answer. Yeah.
That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, John. Really appreciate it. I think I certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure other people did as well. Cheers.
Coming as well.